And I walked out 3 hours later, totally aghast, totally shocked, because what I heard was deeply personal. What I heard was that the majority of criminal hackers are actually children, teenagers, and they're being recruited by cyber criminal gangs off gaming platforms that we all know, like Roblox and Minecraft and Fortnite and Call of Duty.
Yeah. There's defense and offense as well, because some of these young people are currently part of the problem, and obviously that's the mission, to try and divert them away.
The barrier to entry to be a hacker is so low now. Google will give you the tools, YouTube will teach you how to use it, the Discord will find you your community, and TikTok will inspire you with a lifestyle that you might want, which may be criminalized.
I think understanding those personas and those drivers is really important for how you then choose to position things, and whether you're meeting them kind of on their terms and in language in a way that makes sense to them.
I see very, 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 very few, if any, cybersecurity companies that can clearly distill a vision of what the future looks like that is relevant to the people on the street, to the procurers inside an organization, to the decision makers and their customers. And in the end, if you can do that, then you can.
This edition of Communicating Cyber is going to be a little different to our normal ones. Same topic, all about how we communicate and storytelling. But instead of focusing on CISOs communicating up to the board, we're going to look at a much broader topic about how we communicate the importance of cybersecurity to society as a whole, and in particular, the next generation, Generation Z, and some of the issues and problems that we're trying to tackle and resolve there. Fergus, welcome.
Robin, great to see you. Thanks for the invite. What a moment of life to be on your podcast. Wow, it's stars and lights time.
You are very welcome, and flattery will get you everywhere. Thank you ever so much. So I mentioned storytelling there at the beginning, and I think you've come from as I alluded to, a non-cyber background, right? You were kind of in marketing before, various kind of senior business roles, and obviously founding the Hacking Games and involvement with various other investment concerns and things like that. But the Hacking Games is quite a personal story for you as well, isn't it? Would you mind filling people in on kind of a bit of the background of the Hacking Games, and how did your experiences shape the way you wanted to talk about cyber?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is I'm completely unqualified and have zero credibility to do this. So I'm not a hacker. I'm not technical. I'm not from the security industry.
Says the winner of the RSA Sandbox competition.
Yeah, I don't know who that says more about. Them or us. Them or us. So it started for me really about 2.5 years ago. So my career had been, I'd fortunate enough to have a senior role in the largest advertising agency in the world called Ogilvy and Mather, which is part of the WPP network. So I was really fortunate to have kind of, 8 years in America, 4 years in Hong Kong, Singapore, running, some of the most storied legacy brands advertising around the world. I was fortunate to look after the Coca-Cola company and Unilever and Uber and a whole bunch of companies. So
pretty sure no one's ever heard any messages or communications from any of those brands, right?
Yeah, well, as one cynical friend of mine said, you basically persuade people to buy a product or a service that they don't need and can't afford, and repeatedly ask them to do it over again and again. But I had a wonderful experience, and I ended up being the CEO of a global independent group based out of London, looking also after amazing brands like Patek Philippe, the watch brand, etc. So it was a really amazing career. I did that for about 17 years, came out of it and decided I wanted to kind of free myself really, and so started engaging in lots of other activities. I spun up another company in the marketing space. I joined as a venture partner a few VC funds, and just really had a wonderful couple of years of exploring the world and learning about opportunities. And actually that's what brought me here today. Really good friend of mine, now my co-founder, Dan Deer, he's been in cyber for 25 years. And he said to me, look, I really think you should look at the cybersecurity industry as a potential space to invest in. And I said, oh, well, I'm a greedy, grubby capitalist. Why not? Why don't I go and do that? And so in Amsterdam, we went and met with a bunch of hackers. And we had 3 on the phone and 3 in the room. And I walked out 3 hours later, totally aghast, totally shocked. Because what I heard was deeply personal. What I heard was that the majority of criminal hackers are actually children, teenagers, and they're being recruited by cyber criminal gangs off gaming platforms that we all know, like Roblox and Minecraft and Fortnite and Call of Duty. And I walked out panicked, honestly. Firstly shocked, and then panicked about my own kids. I have an 11-year-old, a 10-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And there they are, happily smashing away at Roblox on their iPads. And I think it's a nice, safe environment. It's like Lego, isn't it? I mean, what harm can that do apart from when you stand on it with no socks on?
Ouch.
And yeah, exactly. And it just opened up a world to me. It opened up a world to me of the threat to young people that is happening in their bedrooms through gaming platforms. And it triggered a sense of parental paranoia in me. My job is to look after and nurture these beautiful kids. And in fact, I was kind of throwing them into the lion's den without realizing it. And that stimulated the hacking games as it is today. Our mission is to redirect kids from cybercrime and direct them towards the cybersecurity industry and help them develop the skills and see the opportunities so they can use their skills to make the world better. But it really started from parental paranoia rather than any sort of CISO level qualifications in security, for which I apologize on a daily basis to everyone we work with.
Gotcha. Was there, do you remember? So obviously there's the using your skills for good, persistently persuading people to do things that are better for the world around them now, rather than necessarily buying sugary drinks.
We had low sugar alternatives, just FYI.
we definitely should focus on that in a moment. But I'm really curious. What was there anyone? You were in Amsterdam. You're chatting to these 6 people. It's a world that you haven't immersed yourself in before. Is there one thing or moment that they said to you that really stands out and sticks and drove that home, or was it just the kind of the totality of those kind of 3 hours in Amsterdam?
I think Hollywood is responsible for making us believe there are these kind of critical moments in life. One thing that happened. I think even in the Bible, wasn't there a fork in the road and a redemption moment? Yeah. I'm not sure that was my journey. And I'll use a metaphor that actually our head of psychology, Mark Loftus, who's a clinical psychologist from Oxford University, gave me. He's the head of psychology in the company. What he said is, in life, there are moments when you need to ride a gyre. And a gyre are the thermals that a bird of prey rides as it goes hunting. And as you ride the gyre, you start low and narrow, and then you go higher and wider and higher and wider. Yeah. And so at the very beginning of that gyre, what the bird of prey sees is a fat rat. And it's like, oh, a fat rat. But if he keeps riding and going higher and wider, he'll see more things. He'll see the baby rabbit, the juicy fox, the baby bear. And as he goes higher and wider, he'll see what he really wants, or what she really wants. And what she sees is a baby stag, and zooms down and takes that stag and says, that's the target. That's what I want. And it was a brilliant metaphor, actually, because it helped me understand what journey I was on personally. And at, I guess, the top of my gyre, I met a bunch of hackers, and they unearthed a social problem that was very personal to me in a category, in an industry that I genuinely had no insight into. But I had a collection of experiences from my life which I thought could make a difference. And what was absolutely clear is, if you want to persuade someone, particularly young people, to choose one option and not the other, you need to understand them emotionally. You need to be able to communicate simply. You need to be able to inspire them to aspire to a level of status that they can achieve to. All of this is the bedrock of communications. And I just felt very intuitively, having worked with Gen Z and young generation with all my advertising background, that we needed to inspire this generation to be ethical hackers, not criminal hackers. And you can't do that rationally with technology. You have to do that emotionally with storytelling. And it was a confluence of those events that brought us to where we are today.
Yeah, gotcha. And I think a really important part that you just mentioned then, and kind of you touched on previously, is that kind of cyber's usually described in quite highly technical, fear-based language. But what you were touching on there was about making it attainable and aspirational, and kind of much more positive kind of framing of what you can achieve, rather than saying what you can't achieve. I'm sure you'll join many other parents with the what's more effective, telling kids they can't do something and then watch as they rebel against it, versus trying to get them to buy into where to go. So
I think the cybersecurity industry has got an amazing opportunity, because the level of IQ is incredible. The quality of talent I'm amazed by, and I've been really fortunate to be exposed to many different industries, from investment banking, hedge funds, venture capital, to fizzy drinks from the world, one of the world's largest companies. But the level of IQ in cyber is enormous. The level of EQ is not so high, and the level of marketing IQ, I think, has got a big opportunity to get better. And you can simply see that in the communications. The industry has, in a way, delighted in being behind the shadows. It's delighted in barriers of language and complexity, and some kind of significant lack of diversity in how it thinks. And it's been quite impenetrable. But the issue is that the victims of cyber are now in the mass, not in the niche. They're not in the shadows. Just pick up your media every day. There's an enormous hack when people can't buy their Percy pigs from Marks and Spencer's, when Jaguar Land Rover can't deliver.
Heads will roll.
Heads will roll, honestly. And, there's one thing, a bank reporting, $1 billion of lost income. No one's crying for banks. But when it affects people's daily lives, and when, airports go down, or power grids get cut off in Spain, and, people get really intrinsically affected, suddenly the issue is in the mass. My parents are in their 80s. They know what CrowdStrike is because they saw the sphere go blue. So I think the issue is now in the mass. And what that means is the industry has got an opportunity to go through a moment of evolution. How does it go from being highly technical, highly complex, in the shadows, in the niche, talking to the people who know, into talking to the people who don't know but need to adopt the services, be it B2B or B2C, and explaining not how clever the product is, but how effective the benefit is. And that is the fundamentals of communications. Get to the benefit, not to the complexity of the product, and then you'll be relevant to someone. We've done that with the hacking games. I think that's why, we are right now the go-to for the global media on hacking issues, because we talk about the threat and the benefit, not about how complicated our solution is. And I think that's where the next evolution is for the cybersecurity industry.
I see it time and again in how you make things more human and relatable and dare I say even exciting, in a world where excitement is often a euphemism for having had an incident and a bad thing. Exciting in a really positive way, right? And a lot of that, I think, is like you say, not the kind of fear, uncertainty and doubt, but kind of tapping into some of the skills and traits and of kind of curiosity and creativity, and you talked about the talent in the industry. We've got some really, really resourceful, amazingly bright people that are coming up with all these interesting ways of. Let's be honest. There's defense and offense as well, because some of these young people are currently part of the problem, and obviously that's the mission, to try and divert them away. But yeah, phenomenally clever, kids, young people, and adults in this industry that are kind of, quite creative in their problem solving.
But just to pick up on that, Robin, can I just pick up on
that communication, maybe?
Can I just pick up on that point a little bit? So there is a correlation between businesses that have products that are really complex and the desire to explain to everyone how complicated the product is. But the problem is that just becomes a commodity. I really look at the cyber industry, and, I've been to all the conferences like you have. We're fortunate to work with many of the leading cybersecurity companies. And they'll talk about the next release of product, cyber secure X, Y, Z, but it all looks and sounds the same. It all looks quite middle-aged and middle class, to be honest. There's no differentiation. And that's because people haven't really landed a view of what the future looks like. And I had an old business partner of mine who was, great thinker in the world of advertising. He always said, you need to have an opinion of what the future looks like. If you have an opinion of what the future looks like, you can be a leader today. And businesses have done that all the time. Elon Musk did it with saying, we're going to put people on Mars. It's such a ridiculously far-reaching view. But then the intersection between that was, we're going to transition the world to electric mobility. Okay, right. We're in the business of transitioning the world to electric mobility. So how do we do that? He doesn't talk about the Tesla battery unit kilowatts. Yeah. He talks about transitioning someone from A to B because that's going to be a better future. I see very, 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 very few, if any, cybersecurity companies that can clearly distill a vision of what the future looks like that is relevant to the people on the street, to the procurers inside an organization, to the decision makers in their customers. And in the end, if you can do that, then you can communicate simply and differentiate. And I tell you, did it really, really well. IBM did it really, really well. They had a vision of a smarter planet. I know that because we worked on it at the agency that I was at. But they had a vision of a smarter planet, of interconnected devices and software that could use data and insight in order to make us more efficient, more productive, have a better world to live in. And we ended up putting Watson, their AI, on Jeopardy, the TV show. Because ultimately, if you can get the bus driver in Queens to understand that IBM stands for the future, then you're building the communications of the brand. And that's why those big companies communicate so effectively.
Yeah. There's a whole thread that I'd love to pull on cyber industry there, and kind of visions of the future, or kind of patching problems of today. But I think that's probably one for another time, maybe. So maybe switching from the bus driver in Queens to talking to Gen Z then, which is obviously kind of a core part of I guess I say the hacking games. You've got two audiences that you're trying to reach, right? There's the we'll come on to some of the larger kind of organizational kind of comms out to companies, governments, industry bodies, and the role that they can play. But then a big part of what you're about is also talking to Gen Z, kind of meeting them where they are, engaging them. And I think you kind of have touched on before, like most people's image of a hacker is a kid in a hoodie in a basement or a bedroom somewhere with the lights off, and Matrix kind of green kind of characters coming down the screen. The reality is and can be quite different from that, right? It's not necessarily that view at all, and definitely not solo individuals. It's much more of a kind of community there. Why do you think that stereotype persists, and is there a way that we can kind of challenge that kind of stereotype, or kind of present a more aspirational image?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a result of Generation 1 and Generation 2. I mean, I think the guys in the hoodies in the basement reflect the first few generations of hackers. And that's because it was really hard. Hacking was really hard. You had to be really clever. You had to go and dive in dustbins and go and find the hardware and piece it all together. And you had to kind of work your way into how to break into systems. And you had to find your community, which was also really hard. So by nature, it was self-selecting. And it was for the brilliantly bright. And it was for the few. And you can see that in the community. I love this community of DEF CON and B-Sides. And I feel very, very privileged to be allowed in as someone who has absolutely zero credibility. But you see that they kind of fought against the odds in a way to be part of this community. But this new generation just are not like that. That is not relevant to them. This new generation, the barrier to entry to be a hacker is so low now. Google will give you the tools. YouTube will teach you how to use it. The Discord will find you your community, and TikTok will inspire you with a lifestyle that you might want, which may be criminalized. And so the kids, it's just much easier for them to get into it. This is an AI native generation. They're not sitting there building complex code. They're piecing together solutions to get to the answer that they want. And I think the big shift,
playing technology Lego instead of
And it's funny because we have members of our community who are rightly intellectually dismissive of that, but no one's measuring the intellect here. People are measuring the impact. And this generation,
if it works, I think is the
right. Well, it's working for them, and it may not have the same level of integrity or coding integrity of the previous generation, but things move on. So I think the barrier to entry is so low, and what that means is the profile of these hackers are very, very much wider. And look, I'll give you a great example. So one of our community members is called Ricky Hanschumacher, and Ricky. He was on his way to being a pro baseball player. He was 15 years old in America. He was top 10 baseball player in the country. He was on his way to having a baseball scholarship to a university, to a tier 1 university or a D1 university. And, potentially all odds allowed should be having a career in the MLB.
Yeah.
But he, at 15, he was a really competitive gamer. As you know, the correlation between gaming and hacking is like 100%. So he was a really, really high quality gamer, and he was playing Halo. And he got hacked in the middle of a competition, and they basically DDoSed him, and he lost his connectivity, and he got kicked out of the tournament. And he was furious because he's an alpha competitive male. This guy's like an athlete,
Yeah.
And so he went online to find a way, and he found out how they did it. And that pulled him into the community. He started DDoSing his other competitors. And then within the community, someone said, "Hey, Ricky, you're really, really good at this. Did you realize you could use your skills to break into people's crypto accounts?" And then you fast forward 7 years or 8 years, and he goes to jail for an $8.5 million crypto heist. He went to jail for 4 years. He got out in November just now, and I just did a podcast with him. And he is not the prototype of the hoodie up, no face, hiding in the basement, socially disassociated. He's an alpha athlete. And I think he's a great example of how the accessibility for this generation to the discipline or the world of hacking is much easier to access. And because of that, you get a different prototype. And because of that, you now need to think of what good looks like. And they don't necessarily aspire to be the subterranean anarchist. Actually, their motivations are quite different. So you can only really communicate with anyone if you understand what their motivations are. And now we've got to think about what the motivations of Gen Z are, and we're deep in the thick of that.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's perhaps a really, really illuminating example of just how different the reality from the perception actually is. So you touched on then about motivations and things like that. How do you go about designing? You use that in the broad sense: language, tone, platforms, things like that resonate with Gen Z, who might otherwise kind of tune out of, as you were saying, traditional cyber messaging, which might be a bit boring, bit bland, bit middle class, middle of the road. And yeah, so how do you go about designing that kind of language?
So I'll tell you a funny anecdote. We took one of our Gen Z hackers to a conference in America that we were invited to. And the attendees were professional services, cybersecurity firms. And the audience would be 50, 60 people, highly bright, highly credentialed, really, really, really high IQ, impressive folk. 99% were middle-aged men in gilets. But really, really, really impressive, smart people.
Yes.
And my 18-year-old female hacker, pink hair, sitting on the panel, she just said to them, "You guys are irrelevant to me."
I bet they didn't take that well.
They did not take that well.
Just stunning, kind of like, oh, hang on.
That was definitely the most awkward moment of the hacking games history. But it was a truth. It was a truth.
Yeah.
From her perspective, you can't disagree with how she feels. From her perspective, how they speak, how they engage, how they talk to her generation is like a parent. It's like dad on the dance floor. You can't be dad on the dance floor. And that, by the way, isn't a Gen Z thing. That is whoever your audience is, whoever your customer is. You have to be relevant to them, not telling. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it's also kind of if you turn back the time when you were younger and thinking about your parents, the dad on the dance floor is a persistent thing. It doesn't matter what generation you're in, right?
Exactly. But here's the thing. I think in B2B, people just miss the discipline. The discipline is start with your user. Don't start with your product. So if you to answer your question of how we did it, we just hung out with the users. You go back to the users. You spend primary research time with them. Sit in the room with them. Go, in the old days in advertising, I was just saying this to someone today at breakfast. I did a lot of work in China. I would go and live with families in China for 2 days with an interpreter to understand how they think, feel, and act, and what they see. That's called ethnographic research. That discipline is completely missed. If you really want to build a relevant brand to your target user, be they, by the way, a procurement officer in a fintech business, or be they a Gen Z hacker in their bedrooms, you've got to identify your segmentation. You've got to go and spend primary research time with them, ethnographics, understand them, understand how they feel. Don't understand like what their KPIs are. Let me tell you what people are not motivated by is like hardcore KPIs. They're motivated by intrinsics, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What's their self-actualization? What are they worried about? But, companies are often full of crocodiles. Crocodiles are people who hide under the water, just their eyes above the water. And if you step into their territory and threaten their livelihood, which is their mortgage, their sense of self-worth, their ability to pay for their kids' college fund, then they bite your legs off. And that's why deals don't happen. But if you understand their intrinsic motivations and you can calibrate your proposition to what they emotionally care about, the door opens. And that's the discipline. Understand your user, get in the room with them, do qualitative primary research, build out personas of them. And now, thank God, to the AI tools available, you can then create synthetic personas based on primary research, and then start to test messaging, test insights. The acceleration you can do in the relevance of your communications based on primary research amplified by synthetic personas means that you can be majorly relevant. And I will tell you, you will save so much money in your marketing. The hacking games, we don't spend any money on marketing. It's all through earned media and community values because we are relevant to our community. We understand what motivates them.
Yeah, that's and I can see how that transfers across into security teams and how you might, yes, cyber vendors and wanting to better engage and reach out to sell their own products and services, or a security team trying to market their own value and their internal services to the wider business and the value that they're bringing.
We often talk about it as we have another company that does marketing for complex B2B businesses, technology businesses. And we talk about the unfair advantage. How do you get an unfair advantage in your market? And it always starts with going back to your target user and really understanding their intrinsic motivations and then building your marketing off that, not off how clever your product is. And product-based marketing drives people to think that they've just got to communicate the benefit, the services of the product. And actually, it's exactly that industry where you need to start with the intrinsics of the buyer.
The intrinsics, yeah. I think the motivations is really important. You talked about the crocodile and kind of like swimming around and biting your legs off. One of my favorite bits of feedback from a company that I used to work at previously, and we had this recurring kind of client who always kind of brought us in, and they're exactly the kind of clients and customers that you want. They keep coming back for more. You're doing a good job, and wider business were like, well, what is it in particular about this person, or what is it that we're doing with them that resonates so much? If we can turn all of our clients into them and advocate in the same kind of way, then wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? And forget about threatening their livelihood. Their response was the exact opposite of that, right? And why they kept coming back was, every time I bring you guys in, I get promoted.
There you go. There you go.
Why would I not want to bring you in? Like, if I can move to a new company, like, brilliant. If I want to get myself a promotion 12 months in, get you guys in. You'll do a really clever piece of, put the hard yards in, do the thinking, put the case together, make it really compelling. Help me get on the next step of the. So it's exactly the same kind of perspective right there. It was, the value to them wasn't in the KPIs or this or that or the other. It was personal progression.
So here's an interesting view of that, right? So one of the oldest psychological tools is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And just because it's old, people think it's not relevant anymore because it wasn't created by Anthropic. But the truth is, like, look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Below the line are all of your defense drivers, your fears. I need a roof above my head. I've got to have enough money to be able to feed my family. These are all the things that are the negative drivers. These are all the things that are the triggers for really erratic behavior. But above the line are all your elements of self-actualization, mastery, achievement, respect, progress, promotion. So actually, if you understand where your buyer is on that hierarchy of needs and what is their most biggest driver, you can create messaging and tools and products and services to elevate them up that journey. And, the opposite to a crocodile, by the way, in an organization is a lion. We always talk about lions and crocodiles. The crocodiles are the ones who have got the defensive drivers. But the lions, you all know who your client you're referring to is a lion because he or she wants to achieve something. They want the bonus. They want the accreditation. And they're very visible. And they will probably scratch you along the way because they want to get to the top. But they're very easy to work with because you know what their motivators are. So when you look at your buying signals inside a client, you're looking for the lions or the crocodiles. And how many times have you heard at a monthly sales meeting, the big deal with insert enormous publicly listed company here is just around the corner. It'll be definitely done this month. And 10 months later, nothing's happening. Why? Because the crocodiles are biting it. You haven't understood the crocodiles and you haven't understood the motivation.
And I think that doing a bit of that segmentation and profiling on within a business as well, if you are an internal team, for example, is probably going to be really important there to understand I've been on some panels before where we've talked about people struggling to get tractions with ideas or investments in security programs and things like that. And I think understanding those personas and those drivers is really important for how you then choose to position things, and whether you're meeting them kind of on their terms and in language in a way that makes sense to them. One of our previous guests talks about, talking about 1,000 audiences of one rather than one audience of 1,000, right? They're kind of tailoring those kind of messages. Should we kind of pivot a little bit away from we've kind of talked a bit about meeting Gen Z. We've talked about set the cyber industry to rights. What about bridging the gap and kind of communicating with adults, industry, government? I know you spent quite a lot of time. You talked about kind of earned media and some of the response work that you've done with brands like Co-op. And partnering with a lot of pretty serious, government organizations and agencies around the world as well to help tackle this problem of kind of youth cybercrime, maybe to use an unfair and very middle-aged kind of sounding terminology for it. If you're listening along, Fergus just raised his eyebrows because I was absolutely right in my. He's probably going to have a better way of describing it than that. But many young hackers don't see themselves as criminals necessarily until it's too late. And Ricky is perhaps a good example of that. It started out as being, I'm sure if you went back and said, the first time that he pressed go on DDoSing someone that he was playing a game against in Halo, he wasn't thinking, I'm a criminal. He was thinking, I'm going to win this game, or ha ha ha, or, very different kind of headspace to that. And then it's the kind of almost boiling frog and little by little, that kind of
exactly
changes. They're just mucking about online. So is there anything in particular that you found when it comes to like governments, educators, maybe companies themselves, when they talk about or try to talk to a younger generation or engage them, how can they better engage and redirect them before they cross that line?
Well, I think it's really important to understand the journey that this generation go on. So let's look at the numbers. So publicly known data, this year the world will lose $10.5 trillion in a singular year to cybercrime. There's a lot going into that number, and there'll be challenges up and down, left and right. But hypothetically, let's say that's an index. Some people think it'll be $24 trillion in 2 years. If that's true, that's the GDP of the US. Who knows? But it's definitely growing. It was 8 trillion last year. So the compound annual growth rate is high. And then you look at the perpetrators. And, Europol published a research report where they did 14,000 interviews of teenagers across Europe and the UK. 69% have committed a cybercrime or a gross cyber misdemeanor. 69%. 45% have committed a serious crime. A serious crime would be like identity theft or fraud. 45%.
Wow.
7% have committed what I guess looks like an act of terror. 7%. So that's like statistically valid, 14,000 primary interviews over a 6-year period. So what you've got is a generation who are sliding exactly as you described, like a slowly boiling frog into some pretty serious stuff. And of course it's dislocated, isn't it? A teenager, it takes a lot for a teenager to go down the street with a baseball bat, smash someone around the head and steal their wallet. It takes a lot, you've got to do a lot of gumption for that. But to go on your computer and hack into someone's Minecraft account and steal their Minecraft currency, you don't see the victim. It feels like an extension of gaming. It's not really, it doesn't.
It's really interesting how you could use kind of connected as a proxy for online and kind of cybercrime, but actually the connection is the thing that actually disconnects victim and perpetrator, right? We are way more connected than ever before, but also way more disconnected.
Well, you don't see the blood trickling down the nose, So what happens is you've got this generation of kids, and they also they're not stopped, right? there's a social contract in the real world where we tell our kids, don't go to school and punch a kid in the face and steal their money. And that's reinforced by the village, the local community, the school teachers, and it's enforced by police and law enforcement. But online, there's like none of that. There's no good, bad practice in gaming. Parents aren't guiding their kids. They're not teaching the kids stranger danger. And they're not being arrested, it's an easy slide in. So we have to understand that journey in order to understand how to intervene and engage with them. There's some interesting data out of America that shows that 75% of the people in jail for serious crime reoffend and go back to jail, but only 19% of people in jail for cybercrime reoffend and go back to jail.
Okay.
So that's already telling you that there's a slightly different mindset. When people, see the edge and realize what they've done, they don't want to go back there, and they're not as maybe naturally criminally minded. Jail is a terrible place. I was just on the phone with the police officer who arrested Danny Kelly, who was the TalkTalk hacker, who's one of our community members. And he said, the last place you should send these neurodiverse hackers is jail. It's the worst place in the world for them. It'll just send them down the wrong path. So you have to understand the journey that these kids are at. Now let's look at the other side of the deal. We always talked about value propositions, didn't we, earlier? You have to understand the motivations. You've got this cybersecurity industry that has got 5.2 million or 5.5 million people in it and 4.8 million unfilled jobs. So you've got this enormous labor deficit, loads of reasons why that's unfilled, by the way. But on the one side, you've got this labor deficit. On the other side, you've got this entire generation of natural born hackers who, if guided in the right way, can be really fantastic cybersecurity operatives. Not all of them, of course, but there's a lot of them. So you go, well, that's an interesting, there's surely two value propositions here that can work for each other. And then you look at the context. And I think, Robin, this is where the world is changing so fast. We were talking about cybercrime 2 years ago. Now we're talking about national security. The state of hybrid warfare threats in continental Europe and the UK is plain to see. Just open up your media every single day. Like I said, Frankfurt and Munich airports go down. Heathrow Airport catches fire. Edinburgh Airport goes down 2 days ago. There's a ship cruising around the Shetland Islands investigating underwater cables. You've got 8 drone incursions in 8 different countries in the last 5 days. So the level of national security threat is really, really high. And of course, what's the front line? The front line is critical infrastructure. And of course, what is the easiest way, rather than dropping tanks on the ground, to destabilize a country is to use cyber. Well, if you're going to use a cyber threat on critical infrastructure, what's the best talent to use? Manipulatable young people who get recruited. And I only need to point you to the 2 people, Dutch nationals, who were arrested 2 months ago in The Hague for hacking into the embassy's internet systems. They were recruited by Russian intelligence off Telegram, and they were aged 17 and 18 years old. So when you understand that context, you understand why governments, the defense sector, critical infrastructure really, really care about, at best, neutralizing the threat from young citizens in their own country to their own national security, and at best, harness their abilities and provide job opportunities for them in either the public or the private sector to use their skills to protect the nation. And this is the next 10 to 20 years we're facing. And so when you've got that context, there's a real willing. And my anecdote I'll give you for that is when I started learning about this world, all I kept hearing was, it's impossible to get a job because I need to have a university degree. I need to have government compliance certificates. I need a decade of work experience to get a really poorly paid job. And the issue is that the industry have got all these barriers up. And that is absolutely true. I'm not denying that. But my gosh, am I seeing the leading companies, the big tech companies, the big cyber companies decimating those restrictions. And just yesterday, we were on a call with the senior guys at one of the biggest tech companies in the world. And he made it super clear. He goes, I am not interested in people with just degrees.
Yeah.
It is not a filter anymore. And I think that's the big shift.
I think that's long overdue and very welcome in my perspective. I've never been a big fan of kind of the kind of buzzword bingo and kind of CVs and certs, and definitely not this, I think, quite toxic kind of thing of young people being encouraged to go out and spend loads of money on training courses to get certifications so that they can then get the job. Like that is maybe I am showing my age and a bit old fashioned, but it should be the employer that helps to develop those skills in the individual. There's a base level of education and awareness and interest, obviously, that needs to exist. But
maybe we're marking the wrong homework.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, everyone's looking at resumes and degrees and compliance certificates and training programs delivered by famous training companies. But, our research shows that gaming is the best live laboratory for skills development. And if you can look at how a young person or any person is developing their own modification software to hack games like Call of Duty and Valorant and League of Legends, and you look at how the quality of the aimbots they're delivering, which is a precursor to MTIP and memory injection. If you can, and we've done the research. We did the research with a university that has evaluated the gaming skill sets and the hacking and the modification skill sets and correlated them to cyber skill sets. And when you've done that journey and that correlation, you realize that the 21-year-old has got a decade of real world experience. And that's why we built our data model, HapTI, the Hacking Aptitude AI platform, that evaluates the potential and aptitude of this generation as cyber operatives, not based on the certificates, but based on how they're hacking computer games. And the calibration is unbelievable. There's a wealth of amazing talent right now that is being overlooked by the good guys and identified by the bad guys.
Well, definitely, the more we can do to swing that, because it's a double win, right? It's a removing someone from the negative side of the equation and getting them on the positive side of the equation. It's not just from the from the neutral middle, right? I think there's a it's a two times kind of benefit in identifying those people and bringing them across and giving them hopefully a really long, storied, rewarding career, right, for the things that they are so obviously very good at. And yeah, I think so glad to hear that that organization you were speaking to the other day is kind of starting to break down some of those barriers, because it can't be it can't continue in that kind of way.
I'll tell you a funny
lots of different ways that people can demonstrate their attitude and aptitude, and I think it's way more important to recruit on those sorts of things than it is on purely on certifications.
A year ago, we were in a meeting with a major company, and the head of talent was there. And I said to the head of talent, "Well, would you consider hiring people who haven't been to a top university or even university at all?" And he said, "Oh, absolutely not. No, our standards are so high, only the top universities." But on the phone was the head of cyber, who's a fee earner in that organization, who literally shouted down the phone going, "That is ridiculous. Of course we want this talent." And right there you saw the barriers.
One of those is a lion and one is a crocodile, right? To go back to an earlier.
It's just that people are doing their jobs,
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. But just that kind of, they're quite, stayed in that kind of.
Yeah.
Right.
That's always the case with evolution.
What makes it? I guess there's definitely another thread there around company culture, right? And obviously in that organization, that person had formed their view that the company culture is driven by people who are of this size and shape, and
that's it.
Better diversity of thought and opinion and background is nothing but a bad thing. Fergus, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time this morning. I know you've got a lot on. One kind of final question for you before we bring it to an end. If there's one thing that we could change about the way that we communicate cybersecurity, be it how schools teach it, companies recruit for it, media portray it, what would that be?
I think we have to get out of our own chamber of how complex our products are. I think we need to go back and understand the benefits that it delivers to our end users. And I think we need to stop looking at product launches and start looking at visions for what a future safe world looks like. The cybersecurity company who has a vision at a societal level of the impact they're going to make, and then can understand the emotional drivers of their end users and communicate on that, and then follow up with functions and services, will win. And, like I said, we have a marketing company that works with lots of companies doing that. And I think the cyber industry has got its next wave of that. And the people who move into it first will win. So, I think it's exciting, but it needs to be
a very visionary and very positive, a bit meta vision for a vision. But no, I think that's a really a really important and kind of impactful kind of place to finish. Thank you ever so much for your time today and joining us.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening, audience out there, to another edition of Communicating Cyber. Join us again soon.